There is a sensation that you probably cannot properly name. It is not depression. It is not common fatigue. It is an internal restlessness that appears when everything is quiet, that wakes you up at 3 in the morning for no clear reason, that makes you stop in the middle of an ordinary lunch and think, something is about to change. You feel it, but you do not know what, you do not know when, and you do not know if you will be able to recognize it when it arrives. If you are watching this video now, there is a very high probability that you are experiencing exactly this. And what I am going to show you today will change the way you view this restlessness, because it is not a problem, it is a sign. And knowing how to read this sign makes all the difference between crossing this season lost or crossing it with absolute clarity. I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with yourself. In recent months, have you felt an internal pressure that has no clear origin? A feeling that you are at a transition point, but no one around you seems to notice? As if the world was spinning at its normal pace while inside you something was reorganizing itself in silence. As if you were waiting for something, but did not know exactly what. This state has a name, and it is not pathological anxiety. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is not weakness. It is not emotional instability, and it is not a lack of faith. It is something much more specific than that. And from the moment you understand what is actually happening, the way you live the coming months will be completely different. Science has a way to explain this. Researchers from the Institute of Psychology of the USP have documented that adults over the age of 35 more frequently experience periods of increased sensitivity to context, phases in which neurological maturity produces an elevated capacity to capture patterns in the environment, in relationships, and in events. The practical result of this is exactly what you are feeling.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.
The perception that something is moving, even when you cannot identify what. But biblical spirituality has a much more precise word for this state. And this word changes everything when you understand what it truly means. In the original Greek of the New Testament, there are two completely distinct words to speak about time. The first is chronos. Chronos. It is the time of the clock. It is the time that passes independently of you, which you measure in hours and months and years, which appears on your calendar, and which eventually tires you from carrying it so much. Chronos is democratic. It passes the same for everyone. The second word is kairos, and this word has no perfect equivalent in Portuguese. Kairos is not the time that passes. It is the time that arrives. It is the qualitative moment, the right point, the season of specific opportunity. It is the window that opens. It is the instant charged with meaning and direction. It is the moment when time ceases to be mere quantity and becomes quality. When Paul wrote in Ephesians 5:16 to redeem the time, he used exactly the word kairos, not chronos. He was not saying use your hours well. He was saying something much deeper. Recognize the seasons charged with purpose and act within them before the window closes. This distinction is everything, and most people have never heard of it because we were educated exclusively for chronos, for the calendar, the deadlines, the agenda, the to-do list. No one taught us to recognize the kairos, and that is why so many cross decisive seasons without realizing the weight of what is happening. Understanding the meaning of that period only much later when they look back with clarity and realize, I was exactly where I needed to be, and I did not know it. You are not going to let that happen. Keep watching. A study developed with the support of researchers from FGV Education showed that adults who develop awareness of life cycles, who learn to recognize transition patterns instead of resisting them, show significantly higher rates of effective decision-making in critical moments. In other words, those who learn to recognize the kairos act better, decide with more precision, and suffer less when the decisive moment arrives. The problem is that kairos is rarely urgent, and it is rarely obvious. It presents itself as a gentle restlessness, as a coincidence that seems too improbable, as a conversation you did not seek, but that brought exactly the word you needed to hear, as a recurring thought that you keep discarding because it does not seem practical enough to deserve attention. And your brain, trained by chronos, by the agenda, and by constant urgency, learns to discard all of this as noise. Research from the Institute of Neurosciences of Unicamp demonstrated that adults subjected to information overload develop an automatic filter that discards data considered ambiguous. In other words, the overloaded brain ignores anything that is not urgent and immediate, and kairos never arrives shouting. It whispers. The HeartMath Institute, a research center specialized in cardiac intelligence and intuitive perception, has published studies showing that human beings possess what researchers call heart intuition, an information processing capacity that occurs in the cardiac nervous system and is registered by the body even before reaching the conscious brain. Translating directly, your body perceives the kairos before you can think about it. That feeling in your chest that you cannot name, that weight you carry but cannot rationally justify, that restlessness that appears exactly when everything seems to be fine on the outside, these are not noises, they are data. They are your internal system alerting you to a season that is arriving and that requires you to be awake. The question is not whether the signal exists. The question is whether you are willing to stop long enough to listen. If you had never thought about it this way, I want you to do one thing now. Click to subscribe to the channel. Because this type of content, which connects science, psychology, and biblical spirituality in a practical and applicable way for your real life, is what we do here every week. Click the red button now and stay with me. I want to take you to the book of Ecclesiastes, to the 3rd chapter, where Solomon writes one of the best-known passages in the entire Bible. Everything has its appointed time, but the Hebrew word he uses is not generic. It is et, and et in Hebrew carries a very specific weight. It is not just time in the chronological sense. It is season, opportune moment, the right point within a larger cycle. Solomon is saying that human existence is not linear. It is cyclical. It is composed of seasons, each with its own and irreplaceable function. There is a season to sow and a season to reap. There is a season to tear down and a season to build. There is a season to keep silence and a season to speak. There is a season to wait and a season to act. And each of these seasons demands a different posture, because the wrong posture in the right season wastes the kairos. What separates the wise person from the lost person is not luck. It is not automatic favor. It is the ability to identify which season they are in and act according to what that season asks, and not with what fear or habit suggests. This is E.T. And Solomon, the man who built the temple, who accumulated unprecedented wisdom in biblical history, dedicated an entire chapter to saying that this ability to recognize seasons is the most fundamental of all. But here is the question that no one answers. How do you know which season you are in? Because looking outward does not solve it. The world does not stop to announce, attention, you have just entered a season of kairos. How do you develop this perception? What do you need to train, cultivate, and recognize so as not to let the kairos pass unnoticed? I'm going to give you 3 concrete signs. But first, I need to show you why most people ignore these signs, even when they appear clearly enough to be seen. The first sign is convergence. When you are in a kairos, things that previously seemed completely disconnected begin to converge. A conversation you had with an acquaintance 6 months ago suddenly makes sense with something you read yesterday. A door that closed last year now reveals why it needed to close, because it opened space for something you would not have been able to receive while it was still open. A skill you developed without understanding why suddenly finds a specific, urgent use that only you can fill. Chronos sees coincidences, Kairos sees convergences, and the difference is enormous. Coincidence is random, convergence has direction. It points towards something. Have you been feeling convergences like this? Situations that seemed isolated, beginning to reveal a pattern you did not plan. The second sign is internal resistance. This seems counterintuitive, but listen carefully. In a Kairos season, internal resistance increases before it decreases, because the Kairos summons you to the next level, and the next level requires you to abandon something from the previous level. An identity that no longer serves, a relationship that keeps you small, a pattern of behavior that was comfortable but is incompatible with who you are becoming, a comfort that is, in fact, a well-decorated prison. And the ego resists. Fear resists. The part of you that prefers the known to the unknown resists with all the strength it has. Paul describes this tension in Galatians when he speaks of the conflict between the spirit and the flesh. But pay attention. He is not describing the experience of weak or unspiritual people. He is describing the universal experience of any person genuinely in transition. Internal resistance is not proof that you are wrong. It is frequently proof that the season is real. But here is something crucial I need to show you, because there is a difference between the resistance of growth and the resistance of deception. And confusing the two is where many people make the wrong move in the middle of their Kairos. I will explain this in detail later in this video. The third sign is the sharpening of spiritual senses. In a Kairos season, people frequently report an elevated sensitivity they do not have in other periods. More vivid dreams charged with symbolism, a sharper perception of what is genuine and what is superficial in the relationships around them, a growing aversion to distractions that previously seemed harmless, a lower patience for empty conversations, and an almost magnetic attraction to depth. In Hebrew, there is a verb that captures exactly this state, shakad, shakad. It means to watch, to observe with intentional attention, to stay awake with purpose. The prophet Jeremiah receives this word directly. I am watching, shakad, over my word, to perform it. It is the same verb used to describe the state of the sentinel who cannot be distracted because something important is arriving and he needs to be awake when it arrives. When you are in shakad, when you feel this involuntary sharpening of the senses, this elevated attention that no one asked you to have, but that appeared anyway, it is because your spirit has already recognized that something is arriving and has entered a state of vigil before your conscious mind understood why. How many of these three signs did you recognize in yourself just now? Before continuing, I want you to do one thing. Go to the comments and write the word Kairos. Just that. One word. Kairos. Because when you declare this, you are saying to yourself and to whoever is reading, I recognize that I am in a season of purpose, that the things I am experiencing are not random, that I am not lost, I am in transition. Go there now. Kairos. No biblical story illustrates Kairos better than that of Esther. And I want you to pay attention to this trajectory because it mirrors, with disconcerting precision, what many people are living now. Esther spent years in a position she did not choose, in a palace that was not her natural environment, in an identity she needed to hide because she was a Jew in a Persian court, and that truth was too dangerous to be said out loud. She had formal power, but the power seemed without clear purpose. She had position, but the position seemed to exist for itself, without a greater reason that justified everything she had gone through to get there. Sound familiar? You spent years building something, a career, a family, a set of skills, a reputation, a routine. And sometimes in the silence of an ordinary night you ask yourself, for what? What is the point beyond immediate sustenance? Where is the greater meaning that should make all of this coherent? Then Mordecai arrives with one of the most Kairos-charged phrases in all of Scripture. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Do you notice the structure of this phrase? Mordecai does not make an absolute statement. He does not say, I know it was for this. He asks a question that invites Esther to look back, at the years of preparation that seemed purposeless, at the circumstances she did not choose but that formed her, with completely different eyes. To see that the apparently random had a trajectory, that what seemed arbitrary was, in fact, specific. Research referenced by the Federal Council of Psychology of Brazil shows that the ability to construct a narrative of purpose, to connect past experiences to a present mission, is directly associated with greater psychological resilience, lower incidence of clinical depression, and greater effectiveness in decision-making, in contexts of uncertainty and risk. In other words, Mordecai's question is not just theological. It is a psychological instrument of transformation. When Esther understands her kairos, she acts, and her action is not impulsive. It is calculated, deliberate, and courageous. She asks for 3 days of fasting, a period of internal preparation before the external movement. She does not act on the impulse of the emotion of the moment. She waits for the alignment between internal disposition and external opening. And then she enters the presence of the king, knowing that unauthorized entry could cost her life, and says the phrase that is pure kairos: "If I perish, I perish." This phrase is not despair. It is not resignation. It is complete surrender to the weight of the moment. It is the decision not to let the fear of risk cancel the responsibility of the calling. It is the declaration that the kairos is worth more than the security of the status quo. But here comes the part that almost no one mentions when telling the story of Esther. And that changes everything about how you understand your own moment now. Between the recognition of the kairos and Esther's action, there was a period of 3 days in which, on the outside, apparently nothing was happening. 3 days of silence. 3 days in which circumstances did not change, the doors remained closed, and the dangerous situation remained exactly the same. 3 days that, to any external observer, looked like inaction, but everything was happening on the inside. And it is exactly this intermediate period that most people are not prepared to endure. Researchers from the Institute of Neurosciences of Fiocruz documented that periods of apparent external inactivity frequently correspond to phases of deep processing, moments in which the brain integrates complex information in a non-linear way, consolidating insights that will emerge consciously only when the internal process is complete. Silence is not the absence of movement. It is movement that has not yet become visible. The seed makes no noise while it germinates. The bone does not hurt while it grows. The kairos does not announce itself with spectacular external signs while it is configuring itself inside. And the most dangerous temptation in this intermediate period of silence is this: to conclude that you were wrong, that what you felt was not real, that it was just your imagination, your hope, your desire disguised as spiritual discernment, that perhaps you read the signs incorrectly, and the best thing is to retreat to what was known and safe. If you do that, you will lose your kairos, not because God abandons you, but because you moved from the point of reception before the fulfillment arrived. If this content is making sense to you, if you are hearing this and recognizing your own experience within these words, do one thing now: click the thumbs up. Because when you like the video, you help this content reach other people who are going through exactly the same thing as you, who need to hear this, and who perhaps do not know that this message exists. Click the thumbs up now. Now I'm going to give you 4 concrete practices for navigating a kairos season without wasting it. Because recognizing the kairos without knowing what to do with it is like having a map and not knowing how to read it. The first practice is to deliberately cultivate silence. Not silence from exhaustion, intentional silence. The shakad, 15 minutes in the morning before opening any social network. A moment of prayer without a list of requests, where you listen instead of speaking. A period of quietude sufficient for what is emerging from within to become audible. The HeartMath Institute demonstrated that states of cardiac coherence produced by practices of silence and intentional breathing significantly increase intuitive perception and the ability to process ambiguous signals effectively. You will not hear the kairos in the constant noise of your routine. You will hear it in the silence that you need to actively create. The second practice is to record convergences. Start writing them down. A notebook, a notepad on your phone, any physical or digital support. Every time you perceive a convergence, a connection between apparently separate events, a coincidence too charged to be random, a word that arrived exactly when you needed it, write it down, with the date, with context, with what you felt when it happened. Kairos has a narrative, and narratives need to be recorded to be read in perspective. Without recording, convergences seem sparse and patternless. With recording, they begin to reveal a direction, and that direction is the map of your season. The third practice is to ask questions instead of making premature declarations. Esther did not declare with absolute certainty, "I know exactly what God wants from me." She acted from an open question, "Who knows whether it was for this moment?" This is the right spirit for navigating the Kairos, the humility of the question that keeps you receptive, not the rigidity of the premature conclusion that closes possibilities before they fully open. In practice, this means, instead of trying to force a definitive interpretation of every sign you are receiving, live in the question. What might this be showing me? Where is this convergence pointing? What would I need to let go of to move in this direction? What is the cost of the next step, and am I willing to pay it? The fourth practice is to act within the sphere of influence you already have. This is the most common mistake in a Kairos season, waiting for the big opening before moving, waiting for the clear sign before taking the step, waiting for total security before assuming risk. But Kairos does not work within the logic of total security. It operates within the logic of faith in motion. Esther did not wait for the king to call her. Within the sphere of influence she already possessed, the decision about whether she was or was not going to enter, she moved. Within your current sphere of influence, there is an action that you already know needs to be taken and that you are postponing. A conversation that needs to happen, a decision that needs to be made, a relationship that needs to be evaluated with honesty. A concrete step that you are delaying while waiting for more clarity, more signs, more confirmation. The clarity you are waiting for arrives with movement, not before it. It never comes before it. Turn on the notification bell now, because next week I will bring a video that continues directly from where this one ends, about something that most people in a Kairos season interpret completely wrong, and that costs too much to be ignored. Turn on the bell so you don't miss it. Kairos has 3 distinct phases, and knowing which one you are in now completely changes what you need to do in the coming days. The first phase is the awakening. It is when the signs begin to arrive, but you still do not know how to name them with precision. The restlessness exists. The feeling of transition exists, but clarity about what or where has not yet arrived. This is the moment of shakad, of active vigil. You do not need to act in a grand way in this phase. You need above all to stop trying to suppress the discomfort and start listening to it as information. People in phase 1 generally experience growing dissatisfaction with what previously satisfied them completely, more intense dreams charged with symbolism, a fatigue that is not physical but existential, the fatigue of someone who is being called out of where they are, and an inexplicable attraction to content about purpose, calling, and deeper identity. The fact that you are watching this video this far already says something about where you are. The second phase is discernment. Here the signs are clearer, but the decision has not yet been made. You already know deep down what the Kairos is asking. But there is still resistance, fear of the cost, uncertainty about the result, concern about what the people you love will think when you change direction. Paul in Romans 12 uses the verb dokimazo, which means to prove, test, discern by direct experience. It is not paralysis by infinite analysis. It is active discernment, which occurs in movement, in experimentation, in the step taken with openness to learn. The person in phase 2 needs courage more than additional clarity, because the clarity you are waiting for will never arrive in sufficient quantity to eliminate risk completely. Kairos always asks for a step of faith before absolute certainty. The third phase is activation. It is when the decision has been made and the movement has begun. It does not mean that everything is clear. It does not mean that obstacles have disappeared or that the path has become easy. It means that you have left the position of observer and entered the position of active participant in your own season. Here the temptation is to retreat when external resistance increases, because it will increase when you start to move. Esther was not free from risk after she decided to act. The risk was at its maximum exactly when she entered the presence of the king. But it is at this point of maximum commitment that the kairos manifests itself. Not before. Researchers from the Department of Psychology of PUC Rio, who study life transitions in adults between 35 and 55, identified that the most lasting transformations are rarely initiated by favorable external circumstances. They are initiated by a change in internal perception, the moment when the person stops resisting the season and begins to cooperate with it. Cooperating with the kairos is not passivity. It is the most active form of participation that exists. Which of these three phases are you in now? I need to be direct with you about something, because there is a distorted version of this message that frequently circulates and does real harm to the people who receive it. Kairos is not a magic calendar. There is no date in Chronos that automatically triggers blessings, opens spiritual portals, or guarantees divine favor automatically. There is no numerical sequence or combination of days that by itself produces what only a personal decision can produce. This confusion mixes biblical spirituality with magical thinking. And the result is that people keep looking at the calendar instead of looking at their own inner life. They keep waiting for a specific date to solve what only a personal disposition and a concrete action can solve. They keep consuming content about prophetic windows without ever making the decision that their own kairos has been asking for months. Kairos is not in a date, it is in a disposition. It is in the combination of internal preparation with active openness to what God is moving in your specific life, with your specific history, in your specific relationships. Solomon knew this. That is why he did not write, "There is a right day on the calendar to reap." He wrote, "There is a season for every purpose under heaven," and the season is not determined by the calendar. It is recognized by discernment and lived by the courage to act within it. Your kairos may have started 6 months ago. It may be reaching its peak now, but it does not depend on a date to be real. It depends on your willingness to recognize it, cooperate with it, and act while the window is open. Is there someone in your life who you know is living exactly what we talked about today? Someone who is feeling this restlessness without knowing how to name it, who is in the middle of a transition but has no vocabulary to understand what is happening? Send this video to that person now, share it, because sometimes the message someone needs most arrives through your hands. Share this video. You have made it this far. And that is not casual. People who reach the end of content like this are exactly the ones a kairos season is summoning, because kairos requires sustained attention, and sustained attention is rare in a world built for distraction. Let me summarize what you discovered today. There is a fundamental difference between Chronos, the time that passes equally for everyone, and Kairos, the time that arrives with purpose, direction, and a specific function in your history. Kairos seasons have 3 recognizable signs: convergence of apparently disconnected events, internal resistance that precedes real growth, and sharpening of spiritual senses that produces the state of shakad, active vigil. They develop in 3 distinct phases: awakening, discernment, and activation. And they ask for 4 concrete practices: intentional silence, recording convergences, open questions that maintain receptivity, and action within the sphere of influence you already have now. Esther did not wait for the situation to be completely safe to act. She acted because she recognized the weight of her season, and decided that the cost of not acting was greater than the cost of acting. The question Mordecai asked her is the same one that remains in the air for you now. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Who knows if the entire path you have trodden, including the pains, the detours, the doors that closed, and the seasons that made no sense, was not building exactly the person that this kairos needs? You are not lost. You are in transition. And transition, when recognized as kairos, ceases to be a crisis and becomes preparation. In the next video, I am going to show you something that goes straight to the center of one of the greatest misunderstandings that chosen people carry in this season. Why the isolation you feel is not rejection, it is separation. And what is the biblical and psychological difference between the two that completely changes the way you interpret the relationships around you while crossing your kairos? You won't want to miss it. Until then.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.